Yo, 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 what's up, everyone? It's your boy Infinite here. I have been absent from this channel for a very long time, specifically absent from doing production tutorials, which is something that when I first kind of started taking production seriously, I was doing a ton of and people really liked them. So I'm going to really make an effort to bring these back as something I can give to you guys every couple weeks. I'll include like downloads to the patches and stuff like that. But yeah, so we're back for some Infinite production tutorials, and we're going to hop right into this one. Today is going to be a sound design one. We're going to be recreating the first growl from my new track Unbroken with Luma. Just came out recently, but it sounds like this. It's going to be this first growl right at the drop that you hear.
Leave it all, leave it all, leave it unspoken. Why would I try to fix something unbroken?
So yeah, it's just right that first growl right at the drop.
Why would I try to fix something unbroken?
So yeah, pretty cool sound. It's actually a growl I made in Massive, which I know not a ton of people are still rocking, but I still use it quite a bit, and actually I've been using it a lot more in a lot of the new stuff that I'll have coming up. But yeah, so right away, let's just add our new instance of Massive and hop into making the sound. Download to the patch will be in the description below. If you don't want to sit and kind of learn some stuff, you can just download that and start messing around. But yeah, let's get into this guy. So first thing is first, we're going to set up our oscillators. We're going to use all three for this guy. So oscillator 1 is going to be the AI wavetable. Oscillator 2 is going to be the Chrome wavetable. We're going to pitch that guy up 1 octave. And oscillator 3 is a sonic wavetable. These are actually like individually probably like my 3 favorite different oscillators in Massive. It was interesting when I came back to this sound to see that I use them all for just one growl, because usually this should be 12. Usually I'll use them for like very different types of sounds, because they all are so different. But yeah, it looks like I layered them in this one and it came out cool. So those are the 3 oscillators we're going to use. We're going to change the wavetable type of oscillator 1 to a bend minus plus, and we're going to do that for oscillator 2 as well. Oscillator 3 we're going to leave at a spectrum, and we're just going to adjust our parameters here. So oscillator 1, drave that wavetable position down to the left, so it's about there. The intensity there, and the amp cranked all the way up. Oscillator 2, we're going to have the wavetable position sit roughly there with the intensity down about there, and the amp is sitting just under half. And then our sonic oscillator, oscillator 3 here, we're going to crank the wavetable position so it's roughly 3 o'clock-ish. The intensity is just going to be like a tiny bit lower than that, and the amp is going to go with there. We'll go with there for now. And while we're here, we're going to turn on our modulation oscillator. We're going to turn on the phase to oscillator 1 and adjust the phase knob there. And that's it for the actual oscillators and modulation oscillator in terms of just getting things set up. And we're going to turn on our noise and feedback modules because we're here now. So first thing is change it to bright white noise. That's the one that I like best. Kind of adds a nice little crispiness to the high end without making it like too hissy or harsh. But you can adjust that, experiment, and then turn the amp to about there. And our feedback is gonna just go up a little bit. So this is what the sound should be right now without having really anything going on at all. It sounds like this. So yeah, that's how it should sound thus far. Now we're going to go add our filters and keep moving on. So first thing we want to do is we want to have this series and parallel fader directly at 0.5, directly in the middle here. If you want to see the numerical values, when you adjust things within Massive in FL Studio, it shows you that numerical value right here up at the top left corner where my little cursor is. So drag that down so it perfectly hits that 0.5. I don't know how actually necessary it is to get it exact, but I'm very much like that. So we're gonna, oh, this is painful. Yeah, there we go. 0.5. Because we want it in the middle of series and parallel, because I believe if you put it all the way to series mode, the way it'll run through your filters is your sound will run through filter 1, and then once it's gone through filter 1, it'll run through filter 2. And if you go all the way parallel mode, I believe essentially it's just both filters running at the same time. I think I could be incorrect, but I believe that's how it works. But we want it directly in the middle for this one. Um, Filter 1, we want a band reject filter, and we're going to adjust our cutoff. So it's about there. Bandwidth, we're going to crank just below the halfway, and the resonance, we'll just put right in the middle there. Filter 2 is going to be a band pass filter with our cutoff sitting around there. Bandwidth, again, is just sitting under just half. And then this guy is going to be, the resonance is going to be cranked just ever so slightly over that halfway line there. And we also, while we're here, we're going to crank up the gains on both those filters and bring the mixed fader all the way down to the bottom here. That's going to be important later on in the sound once we get to that. But yeah, that's it for setting up the filters. We're also going to just make sure our oscillator and voice tabs are set up the way we want them. So click this OSC tab over here, and the first thing we're going to do is I'm not entirely sure about all the technicalities of what the restart via gate button does. I know it's something to do with essentially if you have it on, every time it triggers a new note, it'll like restart the phases of your oscillators. Maybe it's something like that, but it does make quite a bit of difference to your sound. So we've got it off right now. It sounds like this. If we enable it, so it does really do quite a bit to the sound. So turn that on. We can just turn the master back to half because I just wanted you to hear that. Enable this guy and then adjust in the pitch bend section here. We want that going up 12 and down 12, and I'll explain why in just a sec. The other thing we're going to do is if you're in FL Studio and if you just have your view like this, hit this little gear here. That's going to bring up this little additional few knobs you can tweak. It's got your pan, your volume, and your channel pitch. So change the range in the channel pitch to 12. Now basically what we just did by adjusting the pitch bend inside Massive, we've now changed that. So if we do pitch automation on this synth now, the range of which the pitch is going to bend, it'll go up 1 full octave and it'll bend down 1 full octave as well. So we've now got this entire 12 semitones above and below the original sound that we can now bend the pitch. And we want that to be 12 because we've set it to 12 up and down within Massive. So we want them to basically just match. That's how I do it. I think you can pitch bend other ways, but that's just the way that I do it. So make sure those are all set to 12 and then head over to our voicing tab. And we're going to quickly just turn on the unison to 2, not 3. Hit on for the pitch cutoff, leave that guy, and this one in the middle here, don't touch either of those. Hit on the pan position and crank this all the way to the left. And while we're here, we're also going to add in our insert effects, because we might as well because we're here. So insert 1, we're going to add a sine shaper to that. Hit the dry wet so it's right in the middle, and the drive can be cranked up to roughly 3 o'clock-ish. Insert 2, we're going to grab a parabolic shaper, and we're going to turn the dry wet and the drive both to 50%. So this is where we should be sounding. Still probably not going to sound like much because we haven't done anything to our filters or our EQ yet, but this is where we're sitting as of right now. Okay, cool. So moving on, we're going to actually start getting closer to what our sound should sound like when all is said and done. So we're going to open up our EQ because we actually do quite a bit of work in here. So the low shelf drag down to about there. The boost roughly the same. The frequency, crank that up a little bit to about there, and the high shelf just ever so slightly down. Now the massive EQ is a little bit different than a lot of other synths, where rather than having very, very hands-on control and you can fine tweak a lot of stuff in the EQ, it's kind of more like, I guess, more vague of an EQ than that. So you've got the low shelf and the high shelf knobs are super straightforward. Essentially, if you crank it up or down, you're either gonna boost your high shelf or cut your low shelf, or cut your high shelf, or just boost the low shelf or cut the low shelf. So you're not getting a ton of control. It's either you're just boosting highs, cutting highs, or boosting lows, cutting lows. That's pretty much it. You can't actually go in and be super, super nitpicky with those two knobs. But with the boost and frequency knobs, I could be a bit wrong, so apologies if I am, but based on what I've learned is the frequency knob, you basically think of it as, so if it's this knob here, exactly what it is, and all the way to the left is 0 and all the way to the right is 100. I think you basically think of this frequency knob as like the frequency spectrum. So all the way to the left is off, or like your low frequencies, and as you crank that knob, it'll go from low frequencies to kind of your low mids, your mids, and then your highs. So basically, where you position the frequency knob is going to determine where you'll be making those adjustments in the EQ, and then the boost knob is where you actually make those either boost or cut. So if you crank your frequency knob like all the way up, it's just gonna, and then you adjust it, either boost or cut, you're either gonna just like boost all the highs like this. I mean, it's not a very high pitch sound anyways. Or if you like bring it all the way down to the lows, it's just kind of a lot more boomier. But that's pretty much how the massive EQ works. It can be kind of confusing if you're not familiar with it at all. But anyways, so that's where those knobs should be. And from here, we can actually really get into the fun stuff. So this is how our sound sounds up until this point without doing any modulation or basically anything drastic to it. This is what it should sound like. All right, very cool. So now we're gonna get all of our movement from our synth, which is what we want it to sound cool. So we're gonna do that with an LFO. So first thing, go to your LFO 5 or whichever one, doesn't really matter. Change it from an LFO to a performer. First thing we want to do is crank the amp mod all the way up. Hit the sync on because we do want it to be a nice BPM sync rate. Change it to 1/8. Now click this little load curve button, and we're gonna drag in the flat line just to start this, and kind of this little, I don't know, loopy bender downer thing, whatever. And then the kind of like halfway floopy bender but half line is going to be the next one, and then everything else is not going to matter because this is only going to play for that much of the sound, and then we're good to go. So that's the shape we want. We're going to start dragging this onto a ton of different areas now. We can start over here with our EQ. So we're going to drag the performer onto our low shelf, drag it down. It's like that. Drag this to the boost and drag it down to about there. Drag it over to our frequency knob and drag this one down quite a bit. That might be there. That, something like that. And then the high shelf, we also want that coming down quite a bit. So now we've got some movement on the EQ. It sounds like this. Still not really much going on, so we're going to continue on with this performer here and modulating a ton of stuff in our synth. So moving on from there, we're going to go to our oscillators, and we're going to drag this performer 5 over to the wavetable position on oscillator 1, drag it up to about there, drag it over to the intensity of oscillator 1, drag it down to roughly there. And I believe that should be it for the oscillators. So you can still slowly hear it. We're starting to get some movement out of this. The real girthiness and thickness is going to come from this that we do here. So now we're going to start modulating the parameters on our filters. So the first thing we want to do is drag this performer to the mix fader over here and drag it all the way up. So what this is going to be doing now is, I think I learned it from a tutorial years ago. It might have been that like really famous barely alive hollow point growl one that everybody used. I think they showed me how you can kind of modulate between filters and massive and get some really dope results from that. So that's why I've set that up this way. So now it's going to be modulating between filter 1 and filter 2, but like carrying the same movement as everything else that's being modulated, if that makes sense. So drag that guy on there, throw that up like that, and then we're going to drag the performer onto the cutoff of filter 2, drag it down to about there, drag it onto the cutoff and the bandwidth of our filter 1, bandwidth to about there. The cutoff we will go up to about there, and that should be it for parameters in there. And this is going to actually start to sound growly now. So up until this point, if you've done everything the same way that I have, then your bass should sound like this. Okay, so we're slowly getting there. We're going to add some more effects now, start getting this a bit beefier. So we're going to go to Effect 2 and add a Dimension Expander here. We're going to crank the dry wet to 50. And then for the size, this is the way I set up the Dimension Expander always in Massive, because it's kind of one of those things where like can be overdone fairly easy. And you may think, you know, oh, Dimension Expander is going to make my bass sound big and wide and awesome. But it's quite easy to make it sound very muddy and messy by like just crushing Dimension Expander. So I always have the dry wet in Massive set to 50% right in the middle, and then I crank the size knob all the way down to the left, and then I drag it up so it's literally like a single notch up. So if you want to be precise in FL, drag it all the way down, and you can see in the top left corner up here it's going to show 0. And then when you want to drag it up that literal 1 notch, just go very slow until you see it change up in the top left corner. There you go. So that's all I want it to do. So that's the settings for mine. With those effects on, or we've got to add effect 1 as well. Sorry. We're going to add a classic tube to our effect slot 1, just a nice distortion plugin. The dry, wet, and drive are going to stay at half. And this is where we will be at our sound right now. So it's actually starting to sound like a growl now, which is dope. So now we just have super minor stuff to do, which is we're going to go into our envelope 4, which is the master envelope. You can see when you open a default Massive, envelope 4 is already assigned to like the master amp over here. So adjusting parameters on envelope 4 is going to adjust like your master envelope. So all we want to do in here is crank the level over here on this guy all the way up. I'm also going to give it a bit more of an attack. I'll do this pretty much with all of my basses in Massive, adjust the attack, because what this is going to do is basically going to almost give it like a tiny bit of a side chain without having any side chain. So if you play the sound like this with having just no attack, it's like right there, or just an extremely quick attack rather than like a super gradual one. If you crank it all the way to the right, it's gonna like very gradually ease the sound in, like you can hear. Well, that's obviously too much, but I usually go to about here. And all it's doing is just adding like a very subtle fade to that first transient of the sound. Just gonna help it cut through a little bit with your drums. Do that, and then I also always pull my release all the way down to the left, because I just do. I just always have. So we're sounding quite good now with the actual bass. I think the last thing we want to do, just because I wasn't overly happy with how this sound sounded right away, so I added another LFO. Grab another LFO, change it to a performer. And on this one, we're going to change the rate to 1/4. Load our curves, and we're not gonna change the amp mod or the X fade on anything in this one. It's all good. We're gonna load curve, grab this guy, drag that like that, and then bring everything just up top. And we are going to drag this LFO onto our amp on this little SC box right here, and that's going to do this. So if we mute it, it's just now adding this LFO shape onto like the master amp of this. So again, it's just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. Just very subtle, but it does definitely clean it up the way you like it to. So this is pretty well the patch complete now, but obviously it does not sound like we want it to, like this.
Leave it all, leave it all, leave it unspoken. Why would I try to fix something unbroken?
So to really get it doing that, we're going to need to do some of that pitch automation that we were talking about earlier. So I'm going to paint a pattern in here real quick, and we're just going to quickly show you how to get the same kind of movement that I've got going on. So I've just opened a new pattern here. I'm just making a new pattern clip. F2 is where this sounds nice and good. This is also the size that I want our note to be. So when we play this song, or the sound, sorry, in the playlist, that's how it's going to sound. So we need to actually do the pitch bending now. So I'm just going to, this is how I do it. There's probably other ways in FL Studio you can do pitch automation, but this is just the way I do it. So open up our massive, and right here, this little channel pitch knob, I'm going to right click that and create automation clip. We're going to turn that on. Basically here we can just go to town in drawing in how you actually want the pitch bend of your growl to go. If I were to guess how I did this one, because my growls are very, very predictable, I might be able to get this one like perfect. Probably is something like this, because basically the way you kind of get that whole Skrillex-y, vowely growl type sound is essentially just pitching up and down, or down and up, and really getting some cool gritty sounds out of this. So if I were to guess what this one should sound like, it would be like this. So we'll see how close this is to our actual. It's not correct. I always like, also, once I'm done like drawing in the pitch automation of my synth, I always put it back to the default pitch right away. That way I don't forget about it and then have it all get messed up in a track later. But this is how the growl sounds with, now we've got this pitch automation on. So now you can actually hear it. It's got some movement in the actual pitch. Maybe it's something like that. Let's check our original here. Oh. So it looks like it's still a bit high. Close enough. Honestly, that's pretty much this bass. You can also definitely, from this patch, you know, try whatever you want. You can really make a lot of different cool growls by drawing in different pitch automations just for fun. Let's see how this one sounds. Okay, not so good, but we can do stuff like this. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. That's how you make this growl. I will put the patch in the description or download. If you're curious how I did my processing on it, I do very, very, very little post-processing on top of Massive, but I will show you what I did anyways just to do it. So we'll link it to root selected tracks to this, and then if I open mixer track, bass one, I saved this earlier so I could show you guys. All I've done is I have this little stereo control plugin on all my basses that just keep the synths. I just use this little safe bass button that basically all that does, that means it's going to keep everything 400 hertz and below of this sound in mono. And then I just have a Sugar Bites Wow on here. Actually, this is how it sounds with the processing. It's really, it's so minor, it's not really worth getting into. So I've got a low cut on here and all this other stuff because I process it the way I was mixing it with other elements. But even without any processing, this is how your bass is going to sound. And something that's fun that you can do with it, if you are a massive guy and you're kind of stumped for inspiration, if you have a cool sound, the beauty of this performer tab in Massive is you can, if you're not killing it making sounds, you can just sit here and keep hitting this random button within performer, and if you slow it down, you can get some really cool like ideas. Some great ideas for this too is if you just record this. That as a whole is not great, but if you record that as audio, reverse it, and like go in and chop some of that stuff up, you can get some just like ridiculously cool results. So yeah, patch is available for free download in the description, and please let me know in the comments what more you want to see from me, specific sounds from my tracks you want to hear, specific tips, ways I do things. Let me know, and we will hopefully make it happen. So thank you guys for hanging out, and we'll see you next one. Take it easy.